All right, here we go. It is the System Failure Podcast, number 27. Shout out to Dougie Hamilton.
Big 27. Yeah, Brian. Well, first of all, greetings to all of our listeners. And second of all, I do remember the sore spot of your ill-fated Dougie Hamilton jersey. You and I both bought... this was in like 2015, I think, or 2014, or maybe in the aftermath of the 2013 Bruins Cup run. But we bought really expensive hockey jerseys, like the authentic ones. They're like $350 a piece. And then the guy that you had on yours, Dougie Hamilton, number 27, he got traded in one of a trio of truly unfortunate moves the Bruins made. So number 27 always evokes memories of Dougie Hamilton and the follies of buying jerseys with people's nameplates stitched on the back. It often doesn't go well.
All right, well, I just have kind of a visceral reaction to the number. I mean, I think it was one season, or did I get 2 seasons out of that jersey?
I think you got 2, yeah. Yeah, I think there was a couple good seasons there, but that you really like the guy that you spent $350 on to last more than just the 2 seasons. It should be a keepsake, but...
I guess there's a certain superfluousness to sports viewership that it touches on.
Well, I'll tell you, I've done a move and gone away from the jerseys with the names on them because I like my other clothes so much, but a sports jersey just like dominates your fashion choices. So what I've done is torn a little page out of the playbook of the good people over in Europe and got Patriots and Bruins scarves. And you and I both got Patriots scarves when we went down to see off old Bill Belichick a couple 3 weeks ago. Well, I guess 2 months ago now. But I feel like the scarf can lend an air of elegance and a touch of verve to your outfit, but also it doesn't chain you to one guy who's going to get traded in a truly like head scratching deal. You know, out to where did Doug get traded? Was it Calgary that they traded him to? No, that's where he ended up. I can't quite remember who. I can't quite remember who.
Was it the Hurricanes to start with?
I thought that Dougie went from the Calgary to the Hurricanes, and maybe he had a stop in between. I can't quite recall.
Well, Noah Hannafin was on Calgary, and the Bruins were trying to trade.
Yeah, didn't the Calgary end up swapping? Yeah, I guess probably the adiaphora of minute Bruins trades from 2015 probably isn't going to thrill the system failure audience. So we'll have to jump on Wikipedia and nail that down once we're done putting this podcast in the can. What do you say?
All right. Well, anyway, you're freshly back from your road trip.
Yeah, so I am punchy. I'm going to be all over the road on this podcast. I was in Florida, as you all heard on the last System Failure podcast. I sounded like I was on the phone, and but I had planned to make my road trip home from Florida to Maine in 2 days, but I just kept driving, and each hour I was like, well, I'll do one more hour and see where I'm at. I went as far as to call the La Quinta Inn just outside of Philadelphia in New Jersey just to see if they had vacancy on the way through. They said, sure, come on down, but I was like, well, let me just go for another hour, and then after that I was like, let me go for one more hour and one more hour. And so eventually I rolled. Now we stacked the time change, and we can complain bitterly about the time. I do not know why we take this to the face twice a year, changing the clocks. It drives me absolutely crazy. I get like the rationale from the agricultural era. Isn't the idea that like daylight savings time meant that we wind the clocks back an hour in the winter so that farmers can have a little bit of like so it won't be like pitch black for them when they get up to milk their cows or whatever in the early morning. But now here it is 2024, and almost no one works in an agricultural background, and those that do work in a highly automated agricultural background. And oh, by the way, we also have lights and other things that can help with it. Like we're just and then Arizona, certain counties in Ohio, and there's one other jurisdiction that doesn't do the time change in the U.S., and then the Europeans do their time change at a different time on the calendar, so if you happen to be traveling during this time. So anyway, I guess I'm glad to roll the time change and the crazy trip to Florida all up in one big bag of yuck, and just eat that bag of dicks and take it on the chin, and then hopefully by tomorrow I'll be back on the straight and narrow, and after this podcast, my plan is to go home, eat some food, and then fall asleep, and then wake up tomorrow and hopefully start again. But it was a great trip to Florida. If you can get out of the cold once, for a couple of weeks in the spring, it makes it feel like the spring's coming a lot faster, eh?
Yeah. Well, the time change is this biannual own goal that we score on ourselves.
Yeah, it sure is.
How did your ass feel after, 20 hours in the car or whatever?
Great. Well, we've sure come a long way than when I used to do this road trip in my college days with a crappy 1995 Honda Accord. I now have a 2019 Honda CR-V. And with the CRV has, like with Google Maps, you can find the best route effortlessly. With Spotify, you can have access to a great selection of audiobooks now included with the Spotify Premium. And of course, all the podcasts and all the music, or a good chunk of the music. And you really can entertain yourself going up the highway. And I sure did. It was like podcast after podcast. It was great fun. Rarely do I get a chance to listen to podcasts unadulterated. And boy, how did I get a chance yesterday? Like 20 straight hours from Orlando, Florida, all the way up the coast to Portland, Maine. Really, the seats are much better than they used to be. The only part is like kind of my lower back. Like there's just not a really comfortable place for your head. So after about 20 hours, I was like, I don't want to like slouch forward at all, but there's not really the headrest. Like it's on the same on your planes. The headrest kind of pushes your head forward a little bit. I think these are safety devices to prevent a whiplash injury, and it's fine for a couple hours. But once you start to get up to those 10-hour international flights or those 20-hour road trips, having your like skull pushed slightly forward gets annoying. So that is my one and only complaint. I could have gone further if it weren't for that. That was really where the torment started in earnest. Overall, I feel, other than being extremely tired and feeling in that hazy, dreamy, twilight, surreal sort of state of mind, I feel pretty good.
Yeah, well, you want to relax in those seats, but they just won't let you do it with that headrest positioning.
They're just going to push that skull just a little bit out over your chest so you suffer.
And then I guess I also just wanted to say on the time change that I'm pretty sure I made it from time change to time change, without smoking the weed, man.
Nice. Well, that's a major accomplishment.
Well, I mean, the darkest days of winter are a truly brutal time to, try to survive. So I guess we'll see how it goes in the spring here.
Well, weed's a good tool for, burning up those dark days of winter, as you're saying, and also they're good for killing hours on a road trip. And I've been known to use weed much more, but I did much more. I've leaned on that crutch a lot more in road trips past, but this time I did really well. I didn't have any weed until I got to New Jersey on this trip, and I only had the one bowl to just kind of give me. When I was getting to New Jersey, I felt like I needed a second wind, and having a little tootski, it kind of shakes your brain like an Etch-a-Sketch and resets it, and so you start thinking about other things. It just puts you in a different mental state. So it's almost like you take your stamina back to zero and then restart the clock. So I use it for that, and worked out pretty well, I have to say.
The whole weed and road trip combination. Wait, so is that before Philadelphia?
Yeah. So Do you remember? Well, I guess I don't want to put names in the podcast, but do you remember our old friends Katie and Eric? And they were they were big Philly fans, but they were really from like Cherry Hill, New Jersey. So there's a huge part of the Philadelphia metro area that's in New Jersey because it's right close to the border of Jersey and there in southern Jersey.
Well, you sure made it through a lot of boring southern states then without getting ratchet. So, well done.
Yeah, I was checking those states off my list one after another with relentless and remorseless efficiency.
All right. Well, did you listen to any exciting podcasts?
Yeah, I sure did. I think, boy, man. So the podcast that had the biggest impact on me during my travels up and down the East Coast was Dan Carlin's recent treatment of the Holocaust. I'm not supposed, Brian, that you had a chance to listen to this. It's not in the normal Hardcore History feed. It's in the alternative Hardcore History Addendum feed. And in fact, Sam Harris mentioned Dan Jones, this professor who recently wrote a book, about a year ago, he wrote a book about the Holocaust. It's called like The Holocaust, an Ongoing History or an Unfinished History. I think that's it. Everyone's singing its praises, but apparently Dan Jones turned down Sam Harris and said, I don't know, I'm going on your pod. That's what Sam had said in the beginning, I was like, wow, that's something. But if you want to hear from Professor Dan Jones, you can flip over to Dan Carlin's channel, and there you can hear an interview with the man himself. But the format of the pod was such that Dan Carlin waxed waxed and grim and grisly and dark. It was like a disturbing pod. Hardcore History is often disturbing, and this was Dan Carlin with his throttle all the way in the red. Like he was redlining his Hardcore History engine.
So what did you have to say about the old Holocaust?
Well, I guess what I can do is maybe share a couple of horrific anecdotes. Now, the first one is one you may have heard before. It was used as a plot device in the show MASH. And it was the subject of a radio lab in like 2010 maybe, and the story is this: of course, the Gestapo or the Einsatzgruppen or someone is at the door, and it's like the scene from *Inglourious Bastard*, right? There's a Jewish family a couple of Jewish families hiding out, and they just have to be quiet, right? Because if they just act like no one's home, then maybe the Gestapo or the Einsatzgruppen or whoever will go away, and so they're like hidden, like the premises are being searched, and they're like hidden in some cupboard, and like it's like you can't sneeze, right? If you like sneeze, then the game's going to be up, and it's going to be into the boxcar and off to Auschwitz. And they're one of the people hiding was an 8-year-old boy who just couldn't be quiet. He was just too terrified. He couldn't stop whimpering, and so it was either they all go to Auschwitz. Or something has to be done. And so the patriarch of the family stands up, and he goes over and puts his hands around his son's neck and throttles the kid, and until the kid stops breathing, so he won't inadvertently drop a dime on the rest of the group. Multiple families here, and like there's an eyewitness account of this that Dan Carlin reads in the voice of the person who witnessed it, and the man, he puts his hands around his son's neck and squeezes until the throbbing stops. And then he goes and sits down in the corner and begins to tear his own hair out and say that he's cursed before God for all time, for I've murdered my own son, but at least I saved him from even worse fate at the hands of the brutish Nazis. You're like, oh my God. And then like you imagine making a movie of this next scene, right? Imagine this was a shot in a movie, and so it's like in color. Like Steven Spielberg did Schindler's List, but I feel like almost want to say, like, I know like Spielberg of course is going to be Jewish, and there's this whole, like, I feel like Schindler's List was an important moment for Holocaust remembrance or something. It was a big deal treatment when it came out, as you may recall, Brian. But he put all the Holocaust scenes in black and white, like making it seem surreal, right? And I'm Spielberg, like I feel like that's a terrible blunder. In fact, I feel like he embraced cowardice almost by going the black and white route, because it takes a lot of it makes it seem old-timey or not so real, So just imagine like this sort of scene unfolding. And this was Dan Carlin. He was saying, imagine you've had a cell phone camera with like audio and full color video, but one of these concentration camps, I can't remember exactly which one. There was apparently like thousands of these camps, and they've planted geraniums out front, so it seems all like a happy place, and put a big Star of David up. But like all the Jews know they're there to be murdered, and for the first little while, they just shot people into pits, and then you would line up another row of people, and then shoot those people, and they would fall into the pits on top of you just get these pits that were just stacked up, but like. Shooting these people all day, every day, was destroying the mentality of the German officer, or the German soldiers whose orders it was to shoot down hundreds, thousands of people every day, and they just couldn't wipe out enough people. They just couldn't. They just had to get more efficient, and so eventually they've ended on the Zyklon B thing. But in between those two, they would do a move where they would put they would just pack like a big shower room filled with people, and then they would connect it to a diesel engine, and then just fill the room with diesel fumes. But that takes like half an hour, 40 minutes, something like that. Anyway, the account Dan Carlin read, which everyone should listen to this podcast. It's like it'll chill you to the marrow of your bones. It's the account is from the point of view of a man who is there to observe and report on what's going on for the higher up. The muckety mucks want to know how efficient is the killing going. Go down to the concentration camp, come back and report to us. So he goes down to the concentration camp, and like the man who's running the operation, he's showing them how it's done and how this is how we're operating. You have all these people going, and like a lot of them know, all of these people know they're going to be killed in the shower room. Like some are defiant and they just get beaten. Anyone who speaks up, and everyone else they're just all kind of weeping, and they put them in the shower room and close the door. And then there's a problem with the diesel truck. They can't get it going, and like hours pass. These people are just in the shower room, and it's like 4 hours pass, and they finally get the diesel engine up. And then the man's stopwatch, he's got his stopwatch, and they finally start the truck, and he's talking about like 18 minutes in, some of the people are dead now, like 26 minutes in. All right, most of the people are dead now. 34 minutes in, all right, everyone's dead now. And then we just have to take these people who they can't fall down. They're packed into the shower room so that they're all kind of standing up. And like you can tell which ones are the families, because even in death they're still huddled together, and the bodies are all soaked with like urine and feces, and it's just and they just have to move all these bodies out and then bury them all and then bring another group in. It's just wild. So So yeah, if I can just shake the willies off the nape of my neck here, it gives me goosebumps. But of course, it's been the connection to our constellation of ideas here on system failure is that the Holocaust has its roots in the advent of compound interest, right? It was because compound interest has such a bad name after the fall of the Roman Empire. For 1,000 years, no one but the Jews was allowed to loan out money at interest. And so the scam is that when you, the crowned head of Christendom, you've borrowed all this money from the Jewish community, and then when inevitably you run into the afoul of compound interest, you just announced that the Jews are poisoning wells. I think we talked about this in the last pod. They're practicing blood libel, whatever the trumped up charge du jour is. Announce that, and then everyone will be fine with you rounding up all the Jews, confiscating their wealth, canceling the debts that you owe them, and you can start again. It's kind of the way to work and obviously it's right there in The Merchant of Venice, Shakespeare's famous play. Antonio, the Venetian, borrows money from Shylock the Jew. He can't repay it. The default terms are a pound of Antonio's living flesh, and the whole story is a comedy about how the Jew eventually gets shafted on, about how Antonio doesn't have to pay his loan or the penalty for not paying his loan. And it's all very funny because the Jew gets ripped off in the end. But boy, it all sure becomes sinister by the 20th century when Hitler is leveraging all of the apparatus of modern propaganda and industrialized mechanization, and uses that to carry out the logic of some pretty horrible racial ideas that were well past their vintage in the 20th century. Commonplace in America in the 1900s is that it's okay to just like white people out, but by the time the 1940s rolls around, man. So one last note on Dan Carlin's Holocaust pod. Dan Jones, the professor who wrote the book, had a fascinating statistic. Apparently, in March of 1942, 80% of the people who would die in the Holocaust were still alive. And 11 months later, 80% of the people who would die in the Holocaust were dead. It all happened in a very short period of time in 1942, or the bulk of it happened in a very short time in 1942. That really paints a vivid picture. That's a lot of bodies in just 11 months. Man, So, yeah, now I feel all grim and dark, but hearing about every once in a while you dust off the Holocaust and look at it with fresh eyes, and man, it sure is a wild situation to and if you it's important, and system failure listeners will know that the genesis of the Holocaust goes all the way back to the collapse of Rome and to the all the Roman historians, the heavy hitters, the Livies and the Plutarchs, blamed Rome's collapse on their practicing of compound interest, and that's why compound interest got such a bad name for all of the Middle Ages, and what set the chessboard up eventually. You can just see where the problem in Weimar Germany, the betrayal, Hitler had this whole betrayal conspiracy theory because of what happened at the end of World War I. But really, it's the international banking houses that set up the post-World War I order, and it was the international banking houses that destroyed the German economy, and Hitler just kind of ham-fistedly associated the international banking houses with the Jews. It's the echo of the old medieval anti-Semitism, and that story was one that the German people could understand. The understanding of the horrors of compound interest and the problems of debt and reinterpreting Christianity along financial terms was not something the German people of 1930 were prepared to comprehend, but dusting off the old anti-Semitic tropes from the Middle Ages was definitely something they could comprehend, and the rest, most unfortunately, is history. So, so now that I've bummed everyone out, Brian, did you happen to hear any first of all, have you got any thoughts about the Holocaust, or do you have any podcasts you heard that were interesting?
Well, man, it sounds like a grim spectacle. See, do people in Germany know what was going on at these concentration camps?
Yeah, they touch on this. Apparently it used to be the notion that the notion was the idea was of the clean Wehrmacht, meaning that the German regular army officers had no idea about the industrialized killing that was going on. But then there was a big art exhibit in the 1990s. You see, because it was forbidden, the German government forbid people from taking pictures of the killing, because they were aware this could cause some blowback internationally. But a bunch of people took pictures anyway, and those things started to be discovered in dusty attics, photographs tucked in old uniforms as the World War II generation kind of aged into their dotage. And so a lot of these things got collected into a big art exhibit. and the Wehrmacht exhibit of the 1990s was a big deal in Germany because it proved that like a lot of people knew what was going on, and that you can't just pretend it was one small sliver of German society. And oh, by the way, it's also worth, this was a point well made by Messieurs Carlin and Jones. Like it wasn't just Germans that carried out the Holocaust. We think of them as Germans, but like all kinds of other countries had little mini Holocausts of their own, like Romania, Hungary, places like this. And they had a lot of people in those countries that participated in the Holocaust too. So it ain't just the Germans that got egg on their face. And I do remember, if you go to Budapest, there's this great Holocaust memorial there. There's a bunch of bronze. What happened was they lined people up at the Danube River, the Jews, and just shot them down. Take off your shoes, they do, and then shot them down. The bodies fall plunk into the Danube River, and that's how you dispose of them. And so there's all these bronze shoes, in a art, like it's a statue, but they're all bronze shoes on the side of the river, and with the owners like conspicuously missing, and you just go, God. Anyway, yeah, it was wild, man. It's a great pod. Everyone should check it out. It's man, something else.
I just can't imagine what it would be like to be like a German in this, German society, and they're rolling out this crazy German propaganda, and you've got like these SS officers in their black clothing with like skulls on it and stuff.
Yeah. That was the literal example. There was a woman who was a prominent German. She was prominent in the Bundestag. She's like she's like a Gen Xer. So her like father was a World War II officer, and she has all this writing about how at the time that the 90s Wehrmacht, the 90s exhibition destroyed the myth of the clean Wehrmacht. She realized that the uniform hanging in her attic, that her dad, he was like, this is a black uniform with skulls on it. This is a Schutzstaffel uniform. This is the SS. And like, it's how do you, and like apparently her dad would like wake up, and then he had to sleep with the windows closed, and he'd wake up screaming about children and fire. And it was just like, jeez. I mean, like the mental toll this takes on the, like, you're like, well, these people carried out the Holocaust, but it still was really costly for them emotionally, or in terms of their mental health. Oh, man.
All right. Well, I guess that's enough Holocaust.
Yeah, we got to turn the corner. Man. Yeah, that is some dark stuff, man. But I just imagine a movie with like the geraniums out front and the weird sick veneer where people know they're there to die and they know you're there to kill them, and it's just like, do we resist? Doesn't matter. Like, really, it's come to this. Imagine being taken to a place where you knew they were going to die, but it was like all dressed up as like trying to be like, to have this thin false veneer of cheerfulness, like with geraniums planted out front to try to, the Star of David, and oh my God.
Quentin, like Inglourious Bastards, right? I mean, the scene at the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if there's like another movie that really does a good job at making the situation real. And obviously, it's a bit of historical fiction, and Hitler gets killed at the end. But also, I feel like Django Unchained is like the most realistic portrayal of slavery.
Agreed. Yeah.
Nothing else really conveys the cruelty or like the mechanics and like how the insane dynamics and whatnot. So yeah, I don't know. The fiction is better than anything else.
Now, I have not seen 12 Years a Slave. It just seemed like, I've not seen 12 Years a Slave. But my self-assured expectation is that Django Unchained is going to be a much better treatment of slavery than 12 Years a Slave. And I would definitely say that Inglourious Basterds is a better treatment of the Holocaust than Schindler's List. It really, I mean, it's really, that scene in the beginning at the home of Monsieur Lapidite is really crazy, man. It's just, man. Yeah. All right, so really, you must have a podcast you heard that wasn't about the Holocaust over the past week, Brian?
Oh, yeah. Well, Sam Harris had Brett Stevens on, who I guess is this defender of the war in Ukraine. And I guess I was hoping that it would be more interesting. But, I mean, I guess his point is that it's, we have like a moral duty to support the Ukrainians in their war against Russia. And, well, you'd think just that, we'd have a moral duty not to use Ukrainians as cannon fodder to try to get this military advantage over Russia. And he talks about how, like, Russia is by nature like an expanding state, which is like an all-time case of the pot calling the kettle black.
Yeah, dude, that was crazy. Yeah, I mean, look, yes, it's like, I mean, it's what country isn't Russia's just a historically expansionist country, so we can expect them to just keep going one after another if they're successful in the Ukraine. But meanwhile, so Dave Smith I need to look this up because I haven't had a chance to do my research. Dave Smith had this quote from the former director of NATO. Apparently Vladimir Putin sent a note to NATO in the lead up to his invasion. He said, "Listen, it sure looks like y'all are getting ready to add Ukraine to your quote-unquote defensive military alliance." But that's, as I've articulated many times, that is a red line that I cannot have NATO in Ukraine any more than you could have the Soviet missile installations in Cuba. So can I get it in writing that you're not actually going to put Ukraine bring it into as a member state in the NATO like you got the ball rolling in 2008 at the Bucharest conference, right? Georgia and Ukraine are going to be part of NATO. That is the ticking time. That put a clock up for Putin to act. Right? He's going to have to act before that clock reaches zero. And I guess he said, "Listen, I will not invade Ukraine if you will just put it in writing that you're not going to make Ukraine a NATO member state." And NATO declined. The language from the former NATO director is derisive. He's like making fun of how little of his way Putin got. But now here we are in 2024, and the war is a horrifying stalemate, and the country has been denuded of anyone under 40, at least any men under 40. And it's like, at a certain point, how much are we going to allow the Ukrainians to sacrifice for this crazy idea that we need to expand NATO right up to the very borders of Russia? It was surreal, to say the least. And he made this comment like that, how much of he was like, well, the 65 billion, whatever, the most recent aid package they wanted to send to Ukraine, it's like 1% of the domestic budget, and that's a great, humiliating the Russians for only 1% of our, I shouldn't say domestic budget. It's like 1% of the entire federal budget. So for 1% of the whole federal budget, we can help humiliate the Russians. Well, that's a really good deal. We got to jump on that. And I was like, no, I don't think that provoking other nuclear powers is a great deal. And but in any way, you have to have some kind of crazy stock in some defense companies. I don't know. And that's the thing people got to realize. When we talk about a $65 billion aid package to Ukraine, that's just money that's going right into Lockheed and Raytheon and Boeing and other defense contractors, Northrop Grumman. I mean, we know the list of horrible defense contractors. That money isn't going to Ukraine. It's going into the bank accounts of these it's corporate welfare is what it is. And that's the reason that we are expanding NATO right up to the borders of Russia. It's a stupid strategy, as pointed out by the lights of our own diplomatic corps. I mean, the list of people who were horrified by this is long and been on this podcast before. Bill Burns, the current director of CIA, is one of them. He's the one that wrote the Niet means Niet memo to Condi Rice in 2008 in the aftermath of the Bucharest conference. The old anti-communist hardliners like George Gannon were horrified by this NATO expansion. So anyway, I heard Bret Stephens too, and I just can't believe it. Like when Tucker had on Andrew Tate and he didn't ask the critical questions of Andrew Tate that I would expect, I had to downgrade Tucker in my mind I had to download his journalistic skills. I was like, you have to be a little more adversarial with these people you're interviewing, because I can't just trust your conclusions, because it seems like you're starting from some conclusions and then working backwards. And except for Sam Harris is having hilariously mocked Tucker Carlson at the top of the pod, and Sam Harris went on to do exactly the same thing and be totally uncritical of Bret Stephens' crazy foreign policy establishment status quo rationale that is just so transparent and so untethered from any concept of history. I'm waiting for Sam to do something besides smile and nod.
Yeah, well, Bret Stephens and Sam Harris go on to say that Republicans have a love of autocracy, as evidenced by Tucker's interview with Putin. And I mean, they don't really talk about how Trump figures into that. But
Jon Stewart does. Jon Stewart just came out and announced that that Trump loves that the anti-woke people love Putin because Russia's socially conservative. No evidence of that. I don't think it's not.
Well, it's completely insane. Well, I mean, obviously people like Trump because it just goes back to the DNC stymieing Bernie and ramming Hillary down our throats, and I mean that's exactly why the Donald one.
Yes,
And
yeah.
it's just a crazy claim. Yeah, he was saying, Brett Stevens, that he was like debating someone and that the American people just don't see it that way. And well, just obviously this war in the Ukraine is like of no benefit to us. Yeah, I don't know.
I got the distinct impression during that segment that Mr. Stevens, or possibly, I don't know what Stevens' educational bona fides are. It was my impression that Brett Stevens has gotten his ass smoked in the debate and had been in the shower thinking about what he should have said, and then said it on Sam Harris's pod during that segment. Also, I remember when I listened to that bit, I was looking at south of the border there at the crazy like campsite and
the
tourist trap. Yeah, at the border of North and South Carolina. I remember looking at that while Brett Stevens was going on about this. I was like, man. Well, I liked I want to hear more of what you have to say about Brett Stevens, but I want to take a flag and put it in that little thing where you just said, yeah, this is why it's related to cheating. To deny Bernie the nominations in 2016 and 2020, and that all fits part and parcel of that. So put a flag there, because I really want to come back to that. But I want to hear what else, if you had any other thoughts about Brett Stevens' appearance on... I
mean, well, Sam Harris has like proof of like Putin's like autocracy. He just talks about, this Wall Street Journal...
Evan Gershowitz, the journalist who's over there and imprisoned.
Yeah, well, and Tucker like grilled Putin about this very matter at the end of his interview. And just the portrayal of like a love of Putin. I mean, I guess the grocery store bit they also mentioned.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a bit soft, but
grocery store bit was bad. Let's be honest.
I think like what Tucker wants is to not be involved in this war in the Ukraine and not spending 1% of our federal budget on it. And so I would say that that's why he wants to have Putin say what he said. But he also wants this Wall Street Journal, guy freed.
I believe that Messrs. Harris and Stevens did touch on the death of Alexei Navalny, the noted Russian dissident journalist. But oddly, I didn't hear the name Julian Assange come up anywhere during that because I mean the destruction, like Navalny died of a blood clot, but like. He really died because he got imprisoned for being a Russian political dissident, right? Like, and so I'm willing to totally chalk up Navalny's death. We can just call it a murder at the hands of Putin, right? He probably wouldn't have died this way if he hadn't been confined to prison, and it's really unhealthy for people to be put in prison. But this was the chief piece of evidence bandied about to prove to us that Putin's a bad guy and that autocracy reigns supreme in Russia. And you're just looking around and going, are we not about to receive Julian Assange in extradition from the UK? Didn't we hit him with some trumped up charges? And aren't we like killing Julian Assange for revealing secrets about the United States government? Aren't we doing exactly the same thing that Putin's done to Navalny? Isn't the parallel like startlingly appropriate?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in Russia they probably round up the opposition more fiercely. I mean, maybe they ship their homeless people off to Siberia instead of letting them languish in the street. I don't like. Well, America's misadventures in the Middle East. Like the guy Stevens there. Yeah, he's saying that this isolationist view of the Republicans is like a problem. But I mean, America's misadventures in the Middle East in the past 20 years have been just a complete disaster.
Every military deployment, like every war, has been a disaster since Vietnam, right? Like Syria, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan. I mean the list is truly depressing. It never works out well. It's all about corporate welfare for defense contractors. Couldn't we have some? If we must have corporate welfare, couldn't we at least have corporate welfare that's like constructive? I mean, that's good for like it's helpful. Like, couldn't we provide drinking water or shelter, or couldn't we dig like I said, drinking water, dig wells? Like, couldn't we? There's all these things that the people of the world need and the people of this country need. What are we doing? Couldn't we use corporate welfare to provide that? Like, why does it have to be bombs and destruction? And we know the answer. It's because you can scare people if you can scare people, right? Then you can sort of manufacture their consent and allow you to rain terror or at least fund grisly wars that are just like a harvest of blood in the Ukraine that's just taking out an entire generation of young men. I mean, I just can't believe that. Like, how does someone like Bret Stephens sleep at night? I mean, the man's clearly taking a paycheck, right, to defend the foreign policy status quo, a foreign policy status quo that every regular rank-and-file American has grown to hate, that Democrats and dyed-in-the-wool blues like me had, like, spent the entire 2000s trying to, like, opposing and trying, like, I just can't believe that this is the level of discourse on Dr. Harris's podcast. It was an eyebrow raiser. Let's just say that.
Yeah, well, the final cut is supposed to be a requiem for the post-war dream, and that's like Roger's album, although it's Roger's album performed by the Pink Floyd. But man, yeah, really, the real like tragedy. He says like, should we shout? Should we scream? What happened to the post-war dream? But that's like really more apt. Like after the Berlin Wall came down, with just we're just going to continue to fight against. Like, we just have to manufacture these enemies, which we did in the Middle East, and now we're doing with Russia.
Yeah, we're like slaves to our corporations. We just keep taking sword cuts at this phantom that died in 1992. As if this makes any sense at all. What? Oh, man. Yeah. Yeah, it was something else, man. It really shows the gap between the what's going on in Washington and what regular folks like want from their government. It's just whatever it is that's in Washington is completely out of control.
All right. Well, what was your bookmark here you wanted to make?
Yeah, okay. So I remember being down at chit-chatting with my people. Not everyone, like, everyone's sort of in a different place in their political journey. So I got to talk to all kinds of folks this weekend that I haven't caught up to for a while this weekend, over the past week. Obviously, Tracy and I did a lot of international travel over the past 4 years, since from 2021 to 2022 to 2023, maybe 3 years in there. We did a lot of international travel, and that meant we didn't do a lot of domestic travel, so that meant I haven't caught up with the Florida crew for a while. So it was great to catch up with them all again. And it's interesting to see where everyone is on their political journey. There are still some people that are in the blue no matter who sort of mindset, where it's like, well, we have this emergency. Nothing matters except the Donald not getting elected. We don't like. But by the way, if you're the Democrats and it's like a existential, the Donald's like an existential threat, and we must pull out all the stops to not let the Donald get elected. Well, all the stuff. Well, except for we won't run. Like we could run. They could like run someone that could destroy the Donald, but no, they're not going to do that. We could like. You could enact a bunch of populist policies, but no, we're not going to do that either, right? They could lean into the Bernie Sanders populist wing of their party the way that the right and Trump has, but they're not going to ever do. We will do anything besides run a competitive candidate, of course. Like, defeating the Donald is not important enough to run someone competent that could defeat the Donald, or someone that's going to propose some policies that actual regular rank and file people want, and not what the nefarious Bret Stephens wants on the Sam Harris pod. But I was just, I try to get people to see what I see. Of course, that's what everyone's doing in these political discussions. So abortion was one that came up. Like, this is a big deal to some folks that I chit-chatted with. And I just remember I was, trying to point out, well, my own attitude on abortion is like, I'm definitely like, I'm normally a blue type, so I normally would be like, well, we're not really want to legislate on abortion. It's not really that important. I myself have a cavalier attitude about early term abortions, where it's just like a cluster of cells. And then I have like a really queasy feeling about later terms abortions, where you're making some, like, the woman's life's in danger, and you're making some tough decisions, and the thing you're killing is like a somewhat fully formed baby. Ugh, that makes me feel queasy and weird. And I took the tack of trying to point out that neither the conception nor the birth milestones are really emotionally satisfying to most people. We all fall somewhere in the middle. But I think that's really the wrong tack to take. And thinking about talking about abortion with these folks after the fact, I was like, I think the thing to point out here, there's two things to point out. You have to realize that in 2010, Obama had a supermajority. He had the House, he had the Senate, he had the presidency, and he had campaigned on codifying Roe v. Wade into law. And he didn't do it. And the reason he didn't do it is because abortion is a crucial political football. Like, the Democrats, they're not going to run on on economic policies that actually help the working class, because they're paid by the owner class. So they're not going to do anything to help you financially. But anything that they can get us arguing about that's not finances, or anything that distracts from the 1% versus the 99%, anything that distracts from the Occupy Wall Street ethos is what they're looking for. And that's why they brought abortion off the bench, in the fourth quarter, and brought it back out. Now that football is in play again, and it's going to be crucial to the they need this football to run on, because it doesn't upset their donor base, who doesn't want wages going up, who don't want debts forgiven, who don't want taxes on the wealthy. All of the economic populism, that the prescription is obvious, and it's sitting right there, and we could do it any time if we only had a political party that wasn't totally compromised by donations from the ownership class. And that, I think, is the point on abortion to make to people. You realize the Dems will never codify Roe v. Wade into law, because then they would lose a crucial political football for them to run on. It's not like the Roe v. Wade thing, it's just making it a state-level choice. So it's only the crazy southern states that people are going to lose access to abortion, and it's only going to be the women who can't move out of those states and who also can't stop getting pregnant. The number of people is going to be maybe it's 10,000 abortions that should have happened that now aren't going to happen, that are going to ruin these people. Which is not good. But just realize that we're talking about a very small scope tragedy being made, but we're making a huge mountain out of that tiny molehill, and we're doing it all so that we don't enact the populist Bernie Sanders agendas of 2016 and 2020, to which you alluded earlier in the Brett Stevens podcast section when you were talking about that. And then, the second point I would make on that is, you really can't understand modern American history post-2008 unless you understand that in the 1917 Russian Revolution terrified the rich people in this country, terrified them to the point where when FDR was introducing all of the extreme measures of the New Deal, he wrote publicly and privately, the goal here is to avoid a Russian Revolution like the one in 1917. Now he's talking to his fellow rich people, right? I mean, Roosevelt comes from the New York Roosevelts. This guy's I think Teddy was his fifth cousin or something like that. This family had already had someone in the presidency, and he went to all of his rich friends and said, you all are going to have to pay for this New Deal, or you're getting a Russian Revolution like the one in 1917. And then, of course, some of his friends were so unhappy with this that they tried to initiate the business plot of 1938, where they were going to remove Roosevelt from power and stick a fascist dictator in his place who would not soak the rich to pay for Social Security and unemployment insurance and massive public work projects. And then because of a lot of the New Deal era legislation, we didn't have another huge crash in the economy until 2008. So things were just dormant until 2008, and that was the real moment. By then we had the Clintons had removed the Glass-Steagall protections. In other words, the rich donor class had weaseled their way back into the pre-Great Depression Gilded Age economy that was due for a crash. We got the crash in 2008, and then that's just deranged our politics ever since. You have to understand that the same rich people that the same wealthy elites who initiated the business plot, the coup against FDR in 1938, these families are still there. I mean, that's like the Bush family. Prescott Bush was involved in the business plot. These families are still around, and they are still trying to make off with the vast majority of the wealth of this country, and they own the Democratic Party. And so falling for the vote blue no matter who, oh my God, we have to get getting abortion for these 10,000, 20, however many people there are in the unenlightened districts that are going to be negatively impacted by this Roe v. Wade overturning. You've got to keep your eye on the bouncing ball. You cannot get distracted by the circus that the media is trying to project around us. This is all about class warfare, and that is the piece that Brett Stevens' analysis of the situation is completely absent, right? Because the wealthy elites, they want to exist in this stratified class society, but not have it. They don't want to draw any attention to that, and so that's why we get people what's the word, mendacious, just being ever so slippery in the way that you present your ideas, like Brett Stevens. So anyway, that was my final thought on that. You must understand the terror that the Russian Revolution struck into the hearts of the ruling elite here in America, especially in the Gilded Age, like that Titanic era. In the lead up to the Great Depression, it was like they shot the Tsar and his the Grand Duchesses, his little daughters. I mean, the rich were like, anything is on the table here, and that so much of our politics is driven by that terror, and people don't realize it because they've got no class awareness whatsoever. Because class awareness isn't something that is promulgated by our corporate-owned media. Oof. Have you got any reactions to that major diatribe?
Well, the 08 to 2016 period there is just definitely like an all-time disillusioning moment in democracy.
Yeah. I remember being so excited about the election of Barack Obama. I was like, finally, we got. Like, I was a Bill Maher, blue no matter who, all through the 2000s because I thought that was how we were going to avoid foreign wars. I was like, surely if we get a Dem in there, we won't have any more military misadventures like in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that was just so naive looking back.
And I guess my other thought is just, unfortunately, due to cell phones and flat screens and cheap fast food, it's just going to be a lot harder to get a new deal through because we can instantly or much more readily be distracted. And unfortunately, we're going to be in for quite a bit more pain, I think.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, the chances of a new deal go up greatly when the economic system blows up. Right? Obviously, Bernie Sanders and the Donald are reactions to 2008, and obviously the New Deal is a reaction to 1929. So that you can definitely see why the wealthy elites want to keep this thing going. Just every last day they can extract out of this doomed system, they're gonna do their best to delay the event that's going to arouse everyone's anger and start attracting attention to class, just like what happened in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis when people were lined up on Wall Street holding signs saying we are the 99% and screaming at the banks. That's coming back, and this whole abortion business is related to that. You cannot understand what's happening in the abortion sphere without understanding that that's just one ball in a much larger game. Anyway, I think I made that point 3 times now.
Well, hopefully the Democrats get back in power so everyone can see that they won't do anything, and that'll start the 99% revolution again, or...
So there was also, and I'm forgetting this man's name. I guess I should pull it up right now. There was another Sam Harris pod that came out, and this had the guy who is whose big bailiwick is that because all of these modern democracies have failed to produce children, that we are in a state that we are facing not just demographic decay, but now demographic collapse. And he thinks that this is. Let me just pull up this guy's name here. So just for the sake of reference.
Yeah, I think we talked about him last time he was on the Sam Harris pod.
Yeah,
on this very podcast.
Peter Zeihan. Peter Zeihan. He seems very articulate, but I like his. I like his overall idea that we are going to destroy ourselves if you do not have enough children to replace your population. You are dooming your society. And now the banks would like us to pay them instead of paying. The banks would like the banking works such that it's like capital going the wrong way, right? It's like an abomination from the natural order where adults sacrifice on behalf of children, the children grow up and then sacrifice on behalf of their children, and the system is kind of propelled through time like that. But the banks are all about taking wealth from young people, especially student loans. This was my experience. We're gonna rake up as many chips as we can from young people and give those to old people who already have tons of capital, because capital earns interest, and so people who already have capital get the most passive income off their interest. So in that way, the banks are very vampiric. They're going to it's like the whole conspiracy theory involving adrenochrome it's almost like a symbolic. It's exactly this, like adrenochrome and student loans are exactly the same in the sense that they leach youth and vitality from the young and give it to the old, which is the opposite of the natural order. It's like unholy, unnatural. So Peter's analysis of the situation, it lacks just like Brett Stevens, it lacks any class analysis whatsoever. Like what America does and how we respond to the demographic, the problem that young people aren't having children. All our class structure is going to decide what kind of decision we make and how we deal with this just like our class structure decides everything. Like the reason we're pushing the war in Ukraine is really that's just a front in a class war. I had the same opinion of the Oppenheimer movie. Like developing the atomic bomb was a weapon that was used by the American ruling elite against our own working class. Like the idea, like understanding that the ruling elite in this country were terrified by the 1917 Russian Revolution is why we had to persist in dropping bombs on Japan. It was a show for the Russians. It wasn't at all necessary to achieve any military objectives in Japan at that point. The Hirohito was like looking for some way to surrender and save face. The country was already in ruin. Their ability to put troops in the field was degraded. Their natural resources were gone. They were just in a state of total defeat, and all we had to, but we still, even in that, we still had to drop 2 atomic bombs on them as a show for the Russians, who were assembling tanks on the Kamchatka Peninsula and preparing for an invasion of the second biggest Japanese island. I believe Hokkaido's the second biggest Japanese home island. I think that's right. They were preparing for an invasion of Hokkaido on the other side of the Sea of Yakutsk, and that's why we dropped the bomb. That's why we had to race to get that bomb dropped. It was all about keeping the working class in America under control and not letting them learn about the manifold glories of communism that were on offer from the Russians. So anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
We need more class analysis, eh?
Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah, so you can, even though you'll find that your CNN station is your CNN news, and even more depressingly and disappointingly, your NPR is quite void of any kind of class analysis. You can always come back here to the old System Failure Pod, and we shall be sure to pump you full, so you won't forget that the dynamics between classes is the big piece of the model that so many of our media figures are missing, just because of the way our discourse has historically been in America.
All right. Well, is there anything else we want to talk about?
I don't know. I think we can wrap it up on that note. It was great to go down and warm up and see the crew down in Florida. It is nice to be back here. I'm well pleased, not only that I was able to spare our poor audience from having to listen to my voice over the phone, but also you were able to weave in a solid Pink Floyd reference this week with the final cut, and that always makes me feel good. Like it makes me feel like we can put a bow on our podcast for the week and sleep well at night, satisfied knowing that we injected a little bit of Pink Floyd into this broader discussion of class analysis.
It's the gift that keeps on giving.
It sure is. All right, well, what do you think, Brian? Should I exhort our listeners to send us an email at nop@substack.com? Let us know what you think. Bring up some good points. Maybe we haven't thought of something, and maybe there's some really good reason why we should be supporting whatever madness is going on in the Ukraine that we haven't thought of. So do send us an email at nop@substack.com. And if you want to read some exciting essays, essays like ones comparing the payment of interest on our treasury bonds to the sale of indulgences during the Middle Ages, why, then you can just head over to nop.substack.com and read to your heart's content.
All right. We'll see you.
All right. So long, everyone. Have a good week. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.